All right. Welcome to this live episode of Trad Watch. I am Stephen Cox. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. This is a very special show. As you know, this is our celebration of surpassing 5,000 followers subscribers, right, on YouTube. We're also on Rumble, but Rumble, for whatever reason, is just not really catching on. It's hard to get in on over there. So we're making most of our gains here on YouTube as well as Twitter. So we've got a lot of followers growing on Twitter. So praise be to God for all that. Thanks for being here, spending your evening here with us. It looks like there's a lot of really interesting live streams going on tonight. So the fact you're here, appreciate that. And yeah, I recognize a lot of the names here. Some of you I don't know, but thanks for being here. And it's great that you're here to celebrate because, again, this show is not anything without you all, right? And, we've accomplished quite a bit, I think, in just 2 months. Going to 5,000 subscribers, that's pretty big. And it looks like we already have our first super chat. I'll put this up here. Which era, Gabriel or post-Gabriel era of Genesis? Seti Picante, what are you talking about? I guess I'm not a biblical scholar. I'm just not sure what you're referring to here. But hi, Sean. Hi, St. Anthony. How was the CMRI conference up there? I did see your interview with Bishop Waugh a couple months ago. I've been meaning to get in touch with him because, I know his story. He's up in Quebec, right? And I followed him a bit. I seen his letter when he first left the SSPX. When was that? At least 4 or 5 years ago. And I was interested in his rationale, and I'm glad he sort of found a home. I know a priest who I think was with him for a short while. I'm not sure. I won't mention his name, but he was in Missouri previously. And I think he's up there with Bishop Waugh. So really neat. If you went to the CMRI conference, drop a line in the comments and tell us how it went. Seems like it was pretty good out there. I haven't gone. Potentially in the future, that'd be interesting to check out for sure. And maybe we'll go there in the future. A broken trad watch is right at least twice a day, unless it's digital. Good joke, Phil. Thanks for all the support, by the way. But I think we've done quite a bit here in the last 2 months. Again, obviously with all your guys' help and all the support, and a lot of what's happened has been, I think, really great. And it's not just us that are growing; it's a lot of others too. Chris Jackson's blog over at his Substack blog has grown to, I think, like 4,500 followers. He's, I think, the fastest growing Substack out there. Catholic Esquire, Father Aurelia's blog as well, his podcast. It's a great time to be a trad and a rad trad, a counter-revolutionary trad. I hope the feed's going through. Caroline, sorry that you're getting an error message. I would say maybe click the refresh button. I'm not sure. Hopefully this is working. Not sure if it is or not. It looks like we have a lot of technical issues maybe, so I'm sorry to hear all that if it's happening. But I want to open it up for a lot of questions and answers just to see where you all are at. If you want to ask me anything, that's great. And we can do that. But it's interesting because I started a podcast actually over 10 years ago. So my first foray into the trad world, if you will, or into the Catholic media world was in 2011-ish. This was actually after I worked for the Archdiocese of Chicago for Cardinal George at the time. It was 2010, 2011-ish, and started writing for Catholic Vote at the time. And I'd already started going to a Latin Mass at that time and was discovering, more about tradition watched Bishop Williamson videos online and started going to SSPX pretty much right away. And then started to do a podcast for a website called Magnificat Media. And it wasn't a podcast like this. It was a show, mostly just radio. So it wasn't broadcast, on YouTube, although we should have back then. It was just digital virtual radio. And since that time, I've been spending, so we only did that about, I think, for like 2 years maybe. And it didn't really hit off, get, a lot of attention, didn't get a lot of grassroots support, obviously, because if you're not putting your stuff on YouTube, no one's going to want to be watching it. So at that time, though, I started writing for Catholic Vote. I got really into academia. I was teaching at 2 community colleges as an adjunct for 5 years. Actually, even got accepted to Catholic University of America for PhD work for political theory. Wanted to go to Notre Dame, didn't work out. So for 5 years, I was adjuncting while doing, freelancing, writing, and journalism and things like that. And then finally in 2017 is when LifeSite came along and started to work at LifeSite. And if you're interested in any of my past writings, so again, I have 2 books out there if you're unsure, if you didn't know that. One is called Navigating the Crisis in the Church, Essays in Defense of Traditional Catholicism. This is a collection of my writings since 2011 is the first essay that appears in here. So there's the 10 chapters that I coordinated all of the past writings on. So if you're interested, check that out. I think there's over 100 in there. Vigano endorsed it. Or you can check out my St. Alphonsus book, Navigating the, a Handbook for Holiness. So I wrote that, when was this? 2023, right? In any case, check those out if you're interested in what I've been doing before all of this. Nope, I'm here. I'm not sure what the issue is. Is there an issue with the live stream? Please let me know. Can't tell what's going on. Just hit refresh. I think that would probably work if it does. Hopefully it does. But we'll stay on until otherwise this stream goes off. Not sure what's going on necessarily. But continue to put your questions up. So what I wanted to do tonight, other than just take your questions and to have a general conversation, is, where have we been? Where are we going? What's the latest? What's the future, I think, of the trad movement? What's the latest? What are we going to focus on? And with the show. And I think, first and foremost, what have we been doing the last 2 months? I think we've definitely won the battle with Trad Inc. in this regard. Because 1, we've branded them effectively. Everybody knows that term now, right? It's out there. 2, people are seeing through their tactics. There's a lot of more people saying, hey, what's going on with all these guys? We can see and we recognize that we're just being gaslit, right? We're not playing this wait and see game. So I think that's a victory. 3rd, they're worried. I mean, every podcast these guys do almost. There's some indirect mention of us or others. And that's a good victory. Abato Inc. I like Anthony. He's a good guy. He's going to have me on hopefully in the future. So I think what they're doing is good. And having Mario on was a huge thing. So in any case, Trad Inc. knows we exist, and we're making waves. And a lot of you are as well on Twitter, on your own channels, etc. So there's no more monopoly on the so-called trad movement, right? The establishment trad movement is aware of us. And this is a victory. If it might not be lasting, we'll see how it goes. But I think we've won the last 2 months. I think we should take, great pride in that. Because every day the mask is falling off, right? First we had Glaciergate, we had the Durbin comments about abortion and pro-life, Dilexite, this liberation theology document, and now we're getting appointments, confirming, that Leo's just going to continue on with Bergoglio's agenda, right? So, it was actually interesting to watch because I watched Taylor Marshall's podcast. I think it was yesterday or was it today? He was lamenting the appointment of Supich, as well as who's this new bishop who is now going to shut down the Latin Mass, but he's going to allow the quote-unquote Latin Mass in the Novus Ordo, right? And when I watched Taylor say that, I think his heart about dropped. Like, I thought he just died because he's like, here's what we're getting. Mass in Latin, but in the Novus Ordo. So did someone, like, did Cardinal Burke not tell him that's not what the Latin Mass is? Did Cardinal Burke forget to tell Leo, like, hey, actually, it's a little different than just saying things in Latin? So, every day it gets more obvious. And my hope is that a lot of these guys with the big influence do come around. Again, I see myself as more of someone who can just say, hey, what's going on? Remind yourselves of who you once were, what you were saying, and then keep coming, right? We don't have 1 million followers here, right? So, we'll see where everything goes. But I think we've had some big victories here off the front, off the front nine, if you will. Thank you, Annette, for the St. Alphonsus book. Check that out, by the way. Really helpful to spread the word. I wrote it for actually my siblings. I was raised Novus Ordo. Went to a fairly conservative Novus Ordo church here in West Michigan. It's still going. It's actually a Latin academy now. So they have a lot of Hillsdale grads teaching there. They teach Latin. And okay. Just know Rob is an anti-Semite hypocrite. Okay. In any case, the school I went to, we still had the nuns in the habits. Sister Frances was there. I remember one time she had me get up in front of the room and apologize for just like the smallest thing. I don't even remember what. And but the nuns were there, and they were in their 80s and 70s, so they were still. That was in the 90s. So I was graduated that school in the year 2000, 8th grade. So you can figure out my age now. But so I wrote the book really because St. Alphonsus had a great influence on my life in my 20s to come back to the faith. And it was really what he was saying about the priesthood, about prayer life, and about really, what a priest really does. And I've said this on multiple talks that I've had publicly. I think I've given about 10 public talks at various churches, mostly Novus Ordo, throughout like the Midwest. The two things that St. Alphonsus said about the priesthood really just floored me. And he wasn't original in saying this, but he said there's two things priests can do that even the angels can't do, and even Mary can't do: forgive sins and confect the Eucharist. And that was just such a poignant reminder about, like, okay, the priesthood is legit. It's not this Novus Ordo thing where literally you just got guys running around trying to be social workers, right? And so that was really something I wanted to convey and bring to others who I know and who are close to me, who just did not have the faith and did not hang on to the faith growing up. So that was really good, something I wanted to really pass on to them. But, again, we're here talking about the state of tradition, talking about, where we'll be going. Obviously, the biggest show we've had so far was the Liz Yor one. I'm sure some of you watched it. It was one of the first ones I did. Liz was actually someone who I had on my old podcast for Magnificat Media in 2015, 2016. And, she's a good Chicago gal. And, we see things similarly. And so I did not expect that show. I think it's at 50,000, 60,000 views at the moment. So that was a huge, big splash early on. Trad Inc. exposed Francis 2.0. That was huge. And, I really also enjoyed the shows that we've done on foreign policy and what's going on in Israel right now and the influence of the Zionist lobby. But it just does not seem like this program that viewers really kind of want that content. So that's, something we'll maybe occasionally do and primarily focus on, other issues. But again, I'm not a Vaticanista. I don't really pay much attention to the Vatican. I got into grad school for political theory. I'm writing a book on Vatican II. I read a book on St. Alphonsus. Like there's other topics I'd rather pursue, but in this moment, this is the topic that it seems we need to be focusing on. So William's got a serious question here. Has Archbishop Vigano come up with a way for converts to enter without going through the Novus Ordo church, I'm assuming you mean there, and needing to accept Leo, etc.? Not exactly sure what you have in mind there, William. I do know persons who are close to His Excellency. I do find that a lot of laity who I speak to, who know him, or rather attribute their conversion to him. They see his letters, they appreciate what he's doing to rip up the mask of the global establishment, the green agenda, etc. And they sort of just bypass the entire trad movement. So again, I started in the SSPX in 2011, 2012. Before I went to like an indult for like 6 months before that, and just made the jump primarily because the indult mass was like at 11:30 in the morning, and the SSPX mass was, I think it's like 8. So it's really early for me as a 20-something. I should have been just more eager to get up, but I was lazy. So it took me a while to get to that. So but I've changed my position on various things over the last 15 years, and what I'm finding is a lot of these people who I know who are going to go like straight to tradition, like through Vigano. They bypass all those intermediary institutions like the Indult, FSSP, SSPX, etc. And it's really interesting. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but we'll see. I know he started a seminary, obviously in Italy, so he's got that going, and I believe he's ordaining priests, right? I assume. So we'll see if that grows or not. But I think there's good fruits there. Obviously, there's major good fruits with Archbishop Vigano. So Derek says that I got radical due to Vigano. Wonderful. Yeah, I hope Kevin's not too jealous. I think what's Kevin's subscriber count these days? I'm sure it's bigger than mine. He's been around longer. Question from Bainton. Bainton's been a huge supporter. Bainton, thank you so much for all the chats and the super thanks and for everything you've been sending us. Amazing support. Thank you so much. Obviously, you're someone who's aware of the truth here, and we appreciate that. Have I ever been to a Chaldean Catholic church? I attend it here in San Diego because the regular Novus Ordo masses are so utterly cringe. They are cringe, obviously. I don't know how things are going in San Diego. Is that McElroy out there still, or I think did he get transferred to maybe Washington D.C. now? But I forget who's out there. I have not been to a Chaldean church. I'm not super up to speed with a lot of the Eastern communities. I have, where I'm at in West Michigan, there's a Ukrainian Eastern Rite church, and I do know there's some trads who will go to that because at various times, from the local SSPX church for various reasons, maybe they'll bounce back and forth. I think they like the liturgy for whatever reason. So, that's something I'm not an expert in, but I assume there's got to be some Latin masses out there in San Diego. Are there not? Does anybody know that? If not, maybe we can start sending some priests out there. Bainton's been a big supporter of for us, so really appreciate that. St. Anthony again. In your interactions with Vigano, did he ever talk about his conditional consecration? Did you ever ask him about it? I think that they're not being public about things purposefully. And I don't know all the details. I assume that the picture with Bishop Williamson is his way to say, hey, read between the lines, right? Because if you look at the photo of him and Williamson, it's, in the sacristy, they have their proper vestments on. And I've been told those vestments are what you do when you do a sort of conditional consecration. but I don't know for sure. So I know people are at times wanting to know more, and I assume Vigano is going to be public about that when he wants to. I don't think he's disappointed so far on everything he said. He's come a long way, obviously, to where he's at now, and so I think he has the right to say that. Now I understand people will say, "Oh, it's a public thing." I'm not in any position to opine on some of those things, so it's a difficult question. A lot of people know about or want to know more about it, but I just don't know. In any case, so what do we have coming up for the show? Again, thanks everybody for tuning in here. This is the first live stream we're doing on this show. I know there's some technical issues earlier, and keep supporting this program if you can. Any sort of super thanks or donations are wonderful, but if not, prayers are obviously great too. So put us in your rosary prayer for tonight or whenever you're praying it tomorrow. That'd be really great. So what are we going to do? Well, this Friday we're going to have on Ann Barnhart. Ann has been sort of to me, like one of these folk heroes out there. She's been really on the forefront of a lot of issues for years, and was even there, at the beginning of the Bergoglio regime, and just like setting off nuclear bombs. I think she's still a Benevacantist, so it'll be interesting to pick her mind about that and if she's changed that view or not. We also have on, or at least we're trying to get on, Father Paul Kramer. So I think that'll be a really interesting show. I'm going to put my email in the link here if anyone wants to contact me, stephencox@protonmail.com. You can get in touch with me that way, Bainton. That'd be wonderful. So, Bainton, if you're interested, there's a CMRI chapel out in San Diego. Get in touch with St. Anthony, I suppose, or just look that up online. So check that out if you're interested. So I hope those are interesting shows coming up. I really want to do this show on a theology of comedy, because I was tweeting at Bug Hall earlier today, and this topic of I've increasingly become aware of the need for levity in this time, right? Louis Verrecchio does a really great show, or puts out numerous videos oftentimes about just like mocking stuff. He had some good. This is why we do Meme Monday, by the way, for Cox News. So sign up for our Meme Monday, and we send it out, I think 11 or 10 o'clock every Monday morning Eastern time. That's important, right? Because hey, like we can't just be sitting here lamenting the crisis and then just brooding over everything. And Louis does a good job with his videos. I think I still recall one of his videos, like the Spirit of Vatican II was the video itself. The song was like that was those are the lyrics. And others are like tuned into this too. James Grine, he does a Substack called Ice Truckers. It's like the Babylon Bee, but for trads. And so I think that's important in these times. And so I want to have a podcast with those guys to talk about a theology of comedy. I've always wanted to write a book on a theology of comedy, but I don't know, again, what the church teaches on this. I know Aquinas talks about this. And Bishop Sanborn just did a show where he said with Stephen Heiner that our Lord never laughed, but he smiled. Right? He didn't have a sense of humor, or he wasn't cracking jokes. He wasn't a stand-up comedian, but he smiled. He enjoyed things, right? And that's really interesting to me. It was the first time I ever heard that, and I always did actually kind of wonder that. So I hope we keep delivering on good content for you guys. And if you have any recommendations for guests or topics, put those in the chat and send them to me through email. All right, Stephen, great, wonderful. Stephen is a wonderful name. I do draw inspiration from Stephen as the first martyr, right? So I pray to him to give us good speech. Someone asked a question about the Groypers, trying to find that. Derek, how do we get the Groypers to reject Vatican II? This is the question, isn't it? And I want to bring up a tweet here that I just put out that kind of expresses my frustrations with the Groypers. And I did take this from a friend. I had a conversation with a friend last night, literally, about the Groypers. Like, what's going on with them? Why Why are so many of them like red-pilled? I'll take this off for a second on politics and the JQ. But then when it comes to the church, they can't see like who infiltrated the church, who wrote Nostra Aetate, and like what Dignitatis Humani's purpose was, right? John Courtney Murray, right? Deep State agent, Time Magazine, Dulles family involved, right? The whole council was a coup. So like this was the Deep State's attempt to run its revolution in the church. And they won. So, for me, I'll bring this back up. And my friend was talking about this too. He said his theory is the Groypers are being given a lot of attention right now, right? Especially at the Charlie Kirk at the Kirk shooting. I mean, right around that time, Fuentes got a huge profile in the New York Times, right? Because with Kirk out of there, that entire under 30 generation is looking at, you got Shapiro over there, and you got Fuentes over there on the right. Shapiro on the left, Zionist. Shapiro, Fuentes, the nationalist on the right. One of those guys is going to take up that space. It's not going to be that fake Shapiro boosted 19-year-old kid walking around who's just repeating country club Republican talking points, right? So, back to the tweet here, my buddy thinks that they're being given a lot more attention and maybe even boosted by bots. Because a lot of these anonymous accounts are, we don't know, are they people? Presumably, but they might not be. Because his theory is that what truly matters is the authority of the church, right? So if you have the conciliar institutions, right? You have the documents of Vatican II in charge of seminaries, Novus Ordo seminaries, then that's the chokehold, right? You can't get past that, even as a political movement. And he says, as long as Vatican II remains the law of the land, then no matter how much these red-pilled young men talk about how Christ is king, while not recognizing the modernist revolt that took place at the council that uncrowned him, any long-term plans they might have will be undermined. My buddy said they won't ever become the counter-revolutionaries enemies of Christ truly fear if they remain in the conciliar church, because the liberal pro-climate change authorities in charge of the conciliar church will ensure they keep attending the Bonini Masonic Mass and accept Nostra Aetate Dignitatis Humanae. And I think that's the issue. So it doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, Dominic, I think you're right, and I hate to dunk on Nick. He's a young guy. I think he obviously means well. There's a recent video. Actually, I just saw this today, so I want to bring this up actually and play it for you. So Nick was doing this show this week, and I hope this works. I just want to play it real quick.
Vanessa Howard says, I like your jacket. You look good. Random question. Do you have a favorite feast day? Yeah, dude, I'm a cradle Catholic. No, I don't have a fucking favorite feast day, Nig. N-word. Okay, we're in the new era, so we're not just blasting them all over, but like, do you have a favorite Catholic feast day? Yeah. My favorite feast, dude, I'm a cradle Catholic. You think we have favorite feast days? I'm one of the cradle Catholics that actually goes to Mass and believes in the Eucharist. Do you think we have a feast day? You're asking a lot from me here. Like, yeah, I don't collect the trading cards. I'm just here for the salvation. I'm just here for the sacraments, not the trading cards. I know that's blasphemous. It's always like, do you have the necklaces? One time I lost something and someone said, you should pray to the patron saint of lost items. It's like, dude, okay, so what is this, Pokemon? Gotta catch them all. People are sending.
So, I know a lot of Groypers too. And I know people who are like directly in touch with Nick. And, I think there's a lot of upside to everything they're doing. I give a lot of credit to the victories they've had and how they're punching through. It's giving a lot of space to others to enter that realm as well. But, if, I've gotten hits from some of them in recent days, Pine Sap especially, as well as another guy. And, it seems a lot of them are just 20-somethings who are kind of angry about a lot of stuff, and that's fine. It's good to be passionate and zealous. I am too. I think, though, the solutions they're looking to the conciliar church is not going to get you the solutions. So, in my view, if you look to World War II, right, the church was ascendant. there was going to be, I think, if you never had a Vatican II, or if you had a Vatican II that did what the church needed to do, right? Like literally attack communism head on and promoted the Holy Face devotion and redeclared the kingship of Christ and doubled down on fighting modernism. The church, like I think in the next like 30 or 40 years, just given the theological quality of the priests and clergy in the U.S., I'm thinking Father Connell, Father Fenton, and others. I know Father Gomber de Paul, I think, was one of them in the 60s who caught on to the situation going on in the church right away. And so was Ed Wellock and Integrity Magazine, and who else was there? Carol Robinson. Like, I think one of the primary reasons that what happened at Vatican II was to take out the church in the post-Vatican II, post-World War II world, to nullify and to really sterilize it, right? Because it was the biggest threat to the Masonic New World Order that they wanted to institute. So that was World War III, right? That's what Lefebvre always called Vatican II as World War III. And so, you know, how the Groypers can't see that, maybe many of them do. You know, how do they not understand Cardinal Bea and Yves Congar and Father Ostreicher and Father Baum were basically conversos, right, doing the bidding of the Jewish lobby with Nostra Aetate, as well as ecumenism, and pressuring basically like Paul VI to put St. Simon of Trent off the calendar. Yeah, how do they not see that, right? Who's responsible for the infiltration and the corruption going on in the institutions? So, you know, there needs to be a lot of education there. I think we'll do that here on this show. I have a series of programs on Vatican II coming up that I want to do a deep dive. And obviously my book, I'm hopefully want to get that out later this year. I don't know if I'll get it there because this summer was so crazy with the life site stuff and really trying to find what I'm supposed to be doing in this time. So that was hectic, put me behind schedule for a lot of things, but especially that book. So maybe we'll just do podcasts instead and try to get these guys clued up on the situation. Stephen, thanks for the super chat. This is wonderful. You've been so kind to us, really. We're putting you in our prayers for sure every day and praying for all of you guys here. Again, 5,000 followers, subscribers on YouTube. It's huge for us. We're really humbled by all that. What's your take on John Paul II? Was he a prisoner, more like Benedict, or was he part of the problem, and how? Oh, yeah. John Paul II was awful. I think it was first, what's his name? Garrigou Lagrange, who taught him in Rome, maybe at the Angelicum. And he said of his thesis that writes a lot, says a little, right? I think John Paul was obsessed with philosophy, his attachment to personalism and dialogue. I mean, he loved dialoguing with the communists, right? He was there in Warsaw. Was fatal. I think he had a very misconstrued version of the faith. Obviously, he palled around with the modernists and the progressive faction at the council. And I just put out a tweet literally just like a couple days ago. I'll try to find it in the meantime here. That it was a quote from Barron. Here we go. That is rarely commented on. And the quote is, John Paul II was one of the leading progressive voices at Vatican II. Barron said that. He attributed that direct phrase to him. Barron also said John Paul II had zero interest in reviving pre-conciliar conservatism. And I put this in this tweet because this is what, like, the Zoomers, I won't just say Groypers because there's a lot of Groypers who are clued up on all this, just don't understand. Vatican II was the infiltration of liberalism and modernism into the structures of the church, into the veins of the institutions of the church. And Alistair McIntyre was a political theorist who just died recently, a longtime professor at Notre Dame, said contemporary debates within modern political systems are almost exclusively between conservative liberals, liberal liberals, and radical liberals. And the same can be said between debates in the conciliar church. Again, here's a quote from Ratzinger. The problem of the 60s was to acquire the best expressed values of 2 centuries of liberal culture and to purify them. So I would even say, Stephen, that, yeah, I don't think Benedict was a prisoner. But Benedict, if you read his 1966 book on the theological highlights of Vatican II, he held St. Pius X, the anti-modernist efforts at the time that he was Pope, he held it in with great disdain. Like, he called that cramped thinking. He said it was not like it went overboard. So Benedict was part of the revolution. He was Cardinal Fring's personal secretary at the council, and Frings is the man who stood up at the very first meeting and said, "I demand a vote on the council members to these committees." He broke the rules. All right, Frings broke the rules like all good revolutionaries right off the bat. Okay, and when he said, "I want the microphone to demand a vote on this," the cardinal in charge said, "No, I can't allow you to do that. It's not on the schedule." And there's like 5 other instances at least of the liberals and modernists breaking the rules of the council. One time, in fact, it was a petition by the conservatives, seeking to address communism in one of the documents, and one of the priests in charge of one of the commissions like dismissed it because he said it didn't fit in the agenda. So, I view both of them as completely committed to the council. They knew what they were doing. John Paul had very strange, bizarre philosophical views, and he was a modernist in that regard. And again, look at his pontificate. All he talks about is the dignity of man. He was obsessed with man. His document, Redemptoris Homines, obsessed with man. I think he has another book called like The Act, the Human Act, or the acting person. So John Paul II was a celebrity for sure. He was puffed up big time by the media. I think he was named St. John Paul II the Great, primarily because of the Jewish lobby wanted that to happen because of everything he did for them by referring to them as their elder brothers in faith, etc. So I hope that answers your question, Stephen. If you have another one follow up, I'd be happy to answer and be more specific. But I mean, these guys are part of the revolution. They are liberals. They might be more conservative liberals because they did support, they fought against, assisted suicide, abortion, etc., which is something that, as we just heard from Leo, if you do that, you're not necessarily pro-life. So there's big problems with Leo for sure on that front. So he is following in the Bergoglio liberal side of this revolution. So that's my answer to that. And I know, Sede, it's so disappointing. I know you have a big picture of him and Divine Mercy in your room. I think I seen it in one of your podcasts. I know you tried to hide it because it was dark in there, but I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but that's just the way it is. So in any case, yeah. So if you have a chat, I think there's a lot of them in here. Keep sending them. I'll try to get through these. American Reform, thanks for being here tonight. George Weigel in his biography confirms a rocky relationship between Garrigou, Lagrange, and John Paul. Yes, I think that's the one thing we need to realize is that the pre-conciliar, church, the church before Vatican II, all of these so-called theologians, Yves Congar, Schillebeeckx, and others, even Roncalli, right? The man who became so-called John the 23rd, right? Was suspect of modernism in the early 1900s. And that was under St. Pius X and the Sodalium, which was eventually canceled. I think it was by Pius XI in 1921, 1922. So there's a whole chapter in my book on the council that goes into the dynamics of the pre-Vatican II debates over modernism, which eventually was just completely thrown out by Paul VI in the late 1960s when he got rid of the oath against modernism. So, we know why they did that, and we know why this is why the conciliar church is in crisis, because they're allowing rampant modernist ideology to run everywhere. And to make this point clear, like I was in a debate with this guy on Twitter last night. I think he's a bot. I don't know. He doesn't have many followers. He was posting like weird anime stuff. So maybe Sede Picante, about that. But here's what I said back to him. Here's like the 6 ways that modernism infiltrated the council. And this is like really important for us to have going forward and to realize and to say to like Michael Matt and others, like, don't leave the church. Well, what church are we leaving? We're leaving a modernist infected, velvet draped, LGBT flag flying church that has for its religion a set of doctrines and beliefs, a liturgy, and practices that are completely at odds with the church as it existed throughout its entire history. So, leaving that church is a bad thing. Putting ourselves under clergy and others who, priests and bishops who are, traditional, keeping the faith, that's a bad thing. I'll get to your question there in a second, Stephen. But here's the 6 ways the council accepts modernism. It accepted liberalism, which is political modernism, in Dignitatis Humanae. It accepted biblical modernism, which is just historical critical method of reading the scriptures and trying to undermine the actual literal interpretation of Genesis and other parts of scripture. That happened in De Verbum. Religious modernism in the form of ecumenism, right? The council reconstituted this Church of Christ to include the Catholics, but also Baptists, Anglicans, Protestants, etc. That happened in Unitatis Redintegratio. Theological modernism, again, this was Yves Congar and others, pushing the new theology, fighting against modernism, and said doctrines can change, doctrines can evolve, doctrines can develop. That was in Lumen Gentium, which is again why I believe that John Henry Newman was made a doctor of the Conciliar Church. Liturgical modernism also came in with the various reforms of Annibale Bugnini. Reforms, they're corruptions, really, right? In Sacrosanctum Concilium, putting active participation above all else, calling the priest a presider, the table instead of an altar. And then philosophical modernism. This was again where especially John Paul went rampant after the council. They rejected scholasticism, Thomism, and they embraced the new sorts of philosophical schools of thinking. And this was done in Gaudium et Spes. So, that's the council in a nutshell, if you don't understand exactly what happened. Don't you think Francis and now Leo represent a more discernible split, that they will be deemed anti-popes? A more discernible split than the ones that came before them? I'm not sure exactly what you mean there. I will say this. I've said this before in a podcast. Leo is definitely a different culture, or different creature than the others, right? John Paul was at the council. Ratzinger was at the council very, very much. He was very, very involved. He was committed to the council. And he was clearly a modernist even after. And in his so-called papacy, he tried to save it, right? He said the extraordinary form of the Mass and the ordinary form of the Roman Rite. And he said they will enrich each other. This is just Hegelian philosophy applied to the Catholic Church, as if like the Novus Ordo could somehow ever enrich the traditional Mass. So it is true, and I do think Francis obviously was not at the council. He, however, was very jaded and hardlined against everything that the pre-Vatican II Church stood for, right? He would mock priests with their lace vestments. His attacks on Latin Mass communities, are profound. But oddly, he loved talking about this as PX, right? That was a big warning flag, I think. And so now with Prevost is different. I have said he's Francis 2.0, but I don't mean him to be like the same. He's not like a clone, right? He's not doing the exact same attitude, right? He's not out there blatantly saying, trads are, what else? What did he call trads? All sorts of names that Francis did, right? And so Leo's clever in what he's doing. He's certainly the papal vestments, which I have always said was part of the deal at the conclave for the conservatives to get a little something. At the same time, he's pushing all the same stuff: climate change, blessing glaciers, Dilexite, liberation theology, straight up. What else has he done? Immigration, right? He's telling the U.S. bishops, hey, push back on this issue. So, and he's continuing synodality, right? Which for him is just going to be talking. We're just going to talk about stuff. And this was condemned in Lamentabili Sane by Pius X. That the church teaching can somehow learn from the church learning. In other words, that we need democracy in the church. That's what Leo's doing. So I do think Leo is different in that he's coming at this like any sort of Novus Ordo trained, catechized Catholic would. He doesn't have the pre-conciliar attitude about what like the Latin Mass was, or what tradition actually is. And I think his Crux interview does reveal a bit about that and confirm my view, is that when he was asked about the Latin Mass, he said, well, why can't they just do the Latin Mass in the Novus Ordo, but in Latin? He seems sort of like bizarrely aloof to it. I'm guessing that, so I'm guessing like that's like, he's just like a normal, typical Novus Ordo person. I mean, I have family who, when I tell them I go to the Latin Mass, they're like, oh, why? I mean, it's just, do you even understand it? I'm like, no, like, you don't understand. Like, this goes back to pre-Vatican II and etc. So I do think there's a difference there for sure, Bainton, but we'll see how it continues to play out. So again, 220 viewers right now. You guys are amazing. Again, thanks for being here tonight. We're doing a special live Q&A session. So put your questions into the chat. I'll try to get to all of them. And again, thanks so much for Stephen Bainton. He's been doing some great super chats tonight. So thank you so much. And sign up for our Substack. If you go to Cox News at the Substack, that's where you can get those. We do Meme Mondays. Meme Mondays, that's what we're being known for. I love Meme Mondays. So I hope that you guys do as well. Romulus, Stephen, do you know anything about Cardinal Mary Dayval dying in suspicious circumstances, apparently appendicitis? I knew he died young, and I knew he was one of the last holdouts to the modernist agenda. I forget which year he died. I'm guessing, because I know he was under Pius X in his 30s. I'm going to guess he died in his 20s. If you can correct me on that, that'd be great. I don't know. I think there's anything that's possible, because if you go actually back to read and look at the biggest voices at the time, who was it? Cardinal Rampolla. He was the one who was allegedly elected, and then it was vetoed, and then St. Pius X got in there. But he like set up an entire system that actually of clergy behind him. He was sort of like, I don't want to say the comparison is exactly the same, but it's sort of, you could say it was sort of like what McCarrick did, and setting up all like, his followers and others behind him. So, that happened for decades after. And Montini, who was eventually Paul VI, and even Pius XII was involved with his sort of branch of clergy. So, sorry if we just got a freeze here. It looks like there was maybe a hole in the live stream. Thoughts on Bishop Samar being a fan of Godzilla? Do you have any strange monster movies you like? I don't know if that's true. I mean, is that true? I have no idea. Strange monster movies. I don't watch movies anymore. I used to really be obsessed with Lord of the Rings and just put it on the background and literally just had it on while I was working during the day. It's funny because I saw on a article a while ago that a Netflix user watched the trilogy for the Lord of the Rings like 100 times in a year, like 100 times. And that's crazy. That's like such a waste of your time on this planet. But I'm hoping they were doing work in the background. But strange monster movies, I mean, I don't know. Sadie, I think the last one I sort of saw was some of that was what, Toy Story? I mean, it's been years since I've watched any of that sort of stuff. Okay. So maybe it is true. I don't know. Again, thanks for being here, everybody. I really appreciate it. American Reform, what are your top 3 anti-liberal papal encyclicals? I think, I think it's not encyclical, but I do think the original Cardinal Ottaviani schema for Vatican II on what would have become the document on religious tolerance explained everything like crystal clear. It did very well at explaining, why the church has to uphold the kingship of Christ and to tolerate the proliferation of, pluralism and in the modern age. So I thought that was a really good explanation. I always go back to Libertas. It's one of the best because it lays out all the different types of liberty, and it's a good introduction to those who are interested in politics and who are like obsessed with the American founding and who've never read something to the contrary. And that always goes hand in hand with me with Morari Vos too. Morari Vos was one of the first like encyclicals that I read back when I was like in my early 20s. And that was thanks to this book from Tan. If you don't have it, I'm sure you all have this book. I read this book for the first time, again, I think when I was 27, 28. I must have been 20. What year was that? 2011, 2010. And everything in here was just like mind-blowing. Quanta Cura was not the syllabus of errors was not like the thing that blew my mind with all this. It was primarily Libertas and Morari Vos. And then Liberalism is a Sin by Father Salvani. Again, not an encyclical, but Liberalism is a Sin did it for me because it really reminded me, or rather showed me, that, the Americanists, George Weigel, the American system of what John Courtney Murray was arguing for was completely bunk. And, this is what I've used multiple times in my podcasts against Trad Inc. to show that liberalism is infiltrating the trad movement, because all like you hear from a lot of them is that we need a united movement. We need big numbers. We don't want to be outside the church, insignificant, not making a dent. Well, God doesn't need big numbers, right? This is primarily a spiritual war. We need to preserve and defend the faith. And I forget which saint said it. Like, our duty is to inform, not to persuade or to convince, right? Because sometimes, as our Lord said, it's going to fall on deaf ears. They have itchy ears. And that's the thing. So, we need to defend the faith, defend the honor of God, to preach the kingdom of Christ, to denounce modern errors. And simple as that. Let the chips fall where they are. If there's 10 of us left, if there's 12 of us, I would hope God doesn't leave only 10 of us, because 12 was the number of apostles, right? Then so be it. If we have to be martyrs, so be it. And I think that's the duty going forward, is to say, hey, look, like, it's nice to have more people on our side, but will that happen? I don't know. Okay. So in any case, keep the questions coming. Good questions here. American Reform, again, thanks for being here. Portuguese, you have that book. Wonderful. It's a classic. How do you not have these books? How are you not catechized? You can't be catechized if you don't have these books. Morari Vos is my favorite. Thanks, Derek. I agree. It definitely was a mask off moment. It was sort of a scales fell from my eyes when I read that, because until then, you always think like James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. You don't even consider the fact that the American Constitution is like innately antagonistic and opposite to the Catholic, the foundational principles of our Catholic political outlook. So, a couple questions here. Again, thanks for being here, everybody. I got that book for free. Love it. Went out. St. Michael's gives books away. Great. Any good books on religious liberty? Yes, quite a few actually. Let's see. Louis Rio, Liberal Illusion, is a good one. It was republished by Angelus Press, I think. It has Bishop Williamson's introduction. I'm not finding it right now as I'm looking online, but that's another good one. F.A. Roussel. I'm trying to find this one. It's also by I think it's Angelus. I can't find it. I'll have to put it in the show notes. Religious liberty, though, one that was a big one for me was actually Michael Davies' book on the council. on Vatican on religious liberty explicitly. The one by Newman Press. It's a very old hardcover one that I think the SSPX is reprinting. It's good because Davies for me answered the question about Americanism and John Courtney Murray and where he went wrong. And it goes through step by step each iteration of the document on religious liberty at the council in each session, and the arguments that each group put forth. So that was really good. Obviously, Archbishop Lefebvre's book, They Have Uncrowned Him, as well as Religious Liberty Questioned, was very, very good as well. So, those are some initial ones that I think are that come to mind. Important question here. Again, thanks, Dominic, for being here. Is there any hope for the SSPX, assuming we get another 1988 in the days ahead? Well, I think the SSPX is in a really difficult spot right now because they put themselves in a corner with this whole consecration of bishops thing. Because for years, they said, they denounced when Bishop Williamson started to consecrate his own bishops, right? And they said, this is not like the others that we did in the past, 1988. And so, they want to repeat, Lefebvre's efforts in the early 1980s to strike a deal with the Vatican. But I think it's an imprudent decision, because whenever you try to repeat something like that, you have to learn from what actually happened. And wisdom necessitates that we learn from what happened, look at what happened, and study in this case, what Lefebvre actually said after the consecrations. He said he had peace about what he did. He said it's important that we not have communion, that the faithful know, the faithful know their priests are not in communion with the counterfeit church. And then you also had the SSPX superiors say we are not in communion with the church either. So that was like, if you're going to be prudent and wise, you would not take Lefebvre in the 80s when he was trying to still strike a deal. You would take him at his most mature thought and say, okay, well, this is what his mature thought was, and we do that, and we continue on. And even as Lefebvre said, 2 years after the consecrations, WM Review reprinted this interview that was published back then, which was hard to find, by the way, on the SSPX website. I'm not even sure if it's even still up. And Lefebvre said, look, we have no fear of going our own way. We should not fear. We are in the church, right? And so I think they're in a tough spot, because if they continue to ask and plead for this, if they go ahead and do it without approval from the Vatican, then they're completely justifying what Williamson and others are doing. It's an emergency situation, and that's it. And if they do get approval, I mean, it seems to me a lot of Novus Ordo people, and especially like FSSP and others, they're not going to just like jump on over and be like, oh yeah, they got approval from Leo. Everybody knows who Leo is. I mean, as Vigano said in one of his recent statements, like, they're applying ecumenism, they're applying this zoo mentality to tradition. They're giving the LGBT parade its rights in the church to have its day in St. Peter's. Then now they're going to give Cardinal Burke his little extraordinary form of the Mass in St. Peter's. And then maybe someday, they'll extend an olive branch to the SSPX. So, to me, I think they're just in an impossible situation that they are not going to look good on either way what they do, because they've burned all those bridges with the resistance and others and said, oh, you can't be doing that. And then, like, if they do what Lefebvre did in the 80s, well, now it looks like they're in bed with the conciliar church by a heretical institution that has only gotten worse since the 80s, right? So they're going to be seen by the people who are becoming red-pilled in about the church crisis, and who are coming to SSPX just in recent years as like, hey, what are you doing? Like, I just left this whole conciliar institution, I was and so like, you're going to make a deal with Leo, who is shutting down Latin masses, who is appointing modernist bishops who are, cracking down on Latin mass, but somehow he's like nice to SSPX. I think people are going to be very suspicious of that. So they're in a very difficult spot. I don't see them really recovering. I just don't see their training of younger priests to be what counter-revolutionary, to be what we need. Again, I'm not aware of everything. I mean, I do know quite a bit, and I'm not discounting the good number of hardline older priests in the society who see things the way Bishop Williamson did, and that the resistance still does. But is that fighting spirit there? I don't know. I think it's like a basketball game, and you're fighting. It's in the fourth quarter. Are we playing to win? Or are we playing not to lose? I think the society's playing it safe to not lose. They want their image to be protected. They don't want to be seen as conspiracy theorists, which is why I think you saw on their podcast during COVID, you had Father Robinson and their host joking about how it's crazy to think that the COVID shot is a depopulation cocktail and that Bill Gates is behind this. That's literally what they said. Go back and read and watch the podcast. I think it's actually still up. And it's rumored Father Robinson might be one of the future bishops. So, horrifying to think about that in some ways. Sean, thanks for being here. I think Lefebvre would have become a sede if he was still with us today. Yeah, I mean, if you read Vigano's excommunication statement, he invoked Lefebvre on 2 occasions, and there were 2 quotes he gave from Lefebvre that said that were Lefebvre saying, "Look, it might be the case someday that we might have to believe this guy's not the Pope." And obviously Vigano was there. He declared Bergoglio an anti-Pope, and it seems he's warming to that exact mentality to say with Leo. So, I think there's a lot of people who I know in the SSPX. If you go read, there's some really good Substacks writing about this right now. And I do know SSPXers since just like the last year and a half who've very much adopted a sort of soft sede attitude about what we're living through, because it's not getting better. So how can it be that the mystical body of Christ, right, is giving us stones instead of bread? How can it be that the church itself, right, is giving us erroneous doctrines, is giving us harmful rites, doubtful sacraments? How is that in fulfillment with what Christ said about his church? Doesn't make much sense. So I think you're seeing a lot of SSPXers and others who are saying, look, this recognized position is almost untenable. And so I think that is a growing thing, which is why, we here wanted to launch the counter-revolutionary traditional movement to include discussions on this topic, because it's so very important to not try to gatekeep and shut people down when we're trying to figure out this entire situation together. It's unprecedented, right? The purpose that the visibility of the church serves is to show the faithful, hey, this is the church. Go here and you'll get the sacraments and you'll save your soul. But if you do that to the Novus Ordo hierarchy, you go there and you get, what do you get? You get liberation theology encyclicals. You get blessings of glaciers. You get all this other rampant modernism that says doctrines can evolve. So, that to me does not show this is of itself the Catholic Church. Thanks for super chat. Jerome, do you think Leo will shut down or limit the FSSP and Institute of Christ the King? It's a good question. I think we first need to let the next 6 months play out and see how bishops are cracking down on the Latin masses. And so far, it's been difficult, right? You see there up in Detroit, not far from me, Weisenberger shut down a bunch. We just saw another place, I forget exactly where, it escapes me at the moment, shut down and to warn people to not go to the SSPX and institute Novus Ordo Latin masses, right? So I think what will determine that is how do the next 6 months go? How do the appointments that Leo is making, what will their decisions be? Because he's obviously not going to intervene on this. And from what I heard, the most recent shutdown in one of these dioceses was approved by the Vatican, by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, I think. Or maybe it was the Divine Worship. I can't remember exactly. Anthony Abate tweeted about it. And so if that's happening with Vatican approval, well, then it's happening with Vatican approval. And so I think if that occurs, you might see, in the future, I think Jerome, you might see more attacks on those communities. Or maybe even, it might be the case that they will also need to offer the it's like exclusively, like normally throughout their day and their months and their years, the Novus Ordo Mass, but just in Latin. So that's very possible. Thanks for super chat, by the way. Put us in your prayers. I'll put you in my prayers as well. Thanks for being here, everybody. I probably got maybe 10 more minutes on this. We're at our highest peak though right now, 270. You guys are awesome. Thanks for being here, spending your Wednesday evening with us. Again, we started at 8 o'clock, so we're going here tonight again to celebrate 5,000 subscribers. Hit that like button. Make sure to share our program, our show with your friends to help us continue to grow, to get out this counter-revolutionary, anti-modernist, anti-Vatican II Catholic message. We need this in these times so much so. And you're all doing a huge part here. The Inside Story of Vatican II by Ralph Wiltingen. I think that's how his name's said. It might be misspelling there. But yeah, Charlie, you're right. It's a great book, as well as I would say Roberto de Mattei's book on Vatican II. It's a good historical document. He's pretty fair to the trads, as well as Lefebvre, as well as Bishop de Castro Meyer in that book too. So be sure to check that out. Tuke, I think you're asking somebody else this question, but obviously not, right? What does he support? He's not supporting the Christian Catholic faith. He's promoting liberalism. He's promoting liberation theology. All right, so maybe 5 more minutes, guys. Losing my voice here. It's all right though, so we'll get through it. I think again, going forward, what we need to do, I'll do these live shows more if you want. Maybe we can make this a regular thing Wednesdays if you're all here. This is obviously the biggest one we've had, the first one we've had, and it's I think very popular with you all. So thanks for coming as well. And yeah, cigar mode, absolutely. Supich, Roche, Farrell, all promoted. What other evidence is needed? These are the bad guys, right? These are the bad guys. And anyone thinking that Supich is going anywhere, I mean, he just got a huge boost after this whole situation with Durbin, right? Okay, so the award was not given. Durbin backed out. But what Leo said was exactly word for word what Supich used to justify giving that award. And Roche, he cracked down on the Latin Mass as well. Farrell, Viganos accused him of having, debauched personal life, etc. He's been over there in the Vatican, I think, for years now. And that's it. We're occupied. We're living under occupied men who occupied powers who are squatters. They are squatters in the Vatican. They don't have the right to be there. And as Vigano said in one of his recent statements, obedience to the obedient. We don't have to be obedient to those who are heretics, who are destroying the church, destroying the faith, objectively speaking, right? Some of them might not know. There are obviously good intending men who are in the conciliar hierarchy who want to defend what they view as the Catholic religion. Of course, it's Vatican II what they're defending. But the objective situation is they are not preaching the Catholic faith free from modernism, right? They're preaching an adulterated version. What I call in my book on the council, decaffeinated Catholicism, because Vatican II was a sort of vasectomy on the church. It was a sterilization operation, and that's what happened. So thanks for being here, Dominic. Again, try hosting SSPX priest and SSA priest and have them hash things out. I'm not a miracle worker. I'd like to be. I would like to probably make that happen sometime. I've always wanted to have a panel of priests to have a discussion about this. But I think at the end of the day, everyone's just so firmly in their camps. It's really hard to get people to talk. And you're not going to probably have one or the other convince them. You might have good points made on both sides, and I think you will. But SSPX, they don't really allow their priests to do digital evangelization, if you can use that term. It's sort of a cringy term these days. But they're not really allowed to have social media accounts, go on video streams like this. They only go on their own stuff. I know the CMRI, I think, does that. I know I've seen a number of their priests on these YouTube channels, etc. So, you know, it'd be hard, but I do know there's a number of probably independent priests who would like to get into discussions. And so, yeah, I think it's a good idea and good topic, because I think we need to have these aired out, you know, in public, to let the public know, and to let those who are unaware that there is a huge, huge swath of people who are still coming into all this, who just don't know what these debates are. I met a guy not long ago, 2 months ago maybe, and he's like, he was talking to me, and it was like talking to myself from like 14 years ago. He's like, "Gosh, I just read Archbishop Lefebvre, this and that, and you know, we just had to leave the indult mass." I'm like, wow, like people are still just converting, and it's amazing, and God bless them. And this man's an amazing person, and his wife and family, I've gotten to know them very well in the last few weeks. And shout out if you're out there watching, you know who you are. And it's great though, it's amazing. But there's so many other things. The crisis in the church is so much bigger than like just the SSPX or just the FSSP or all the other groups, right? It's not just like, oh, we can only go here. There's so many good souls out there who, you know, are raised in various situations. I mean, I know that there's a priest here in West Michigan who was raised sedevacantist, and he's here now. There's a church around here, and like, you know, there's so many stories like that, and God just wants us all to do the best we can, and to, I think, be charitable at the end of the day to those who are still figuring this out and those who we disagree with, right? So that's, I think, my goal here, and I hope that's something you agree with. I think that's a good way going forward to look at this situation and what we're going to use this platform for going forward. So I think that's probably all I got for tonight. Any more super chats, I'll be happy to answer them. But if not, follow me on Twitter. You guys know where I'm at. You're subscribing here. You guys are amazing for spending the last hour and 11 minutes with us as well. So we'll post this obviously on YouTube. We'll get it up on Rumble. Hopefully we'll get some following there. I know it's a very younger audience over there, and it's tough to make inroads if you're not, you know, marketing yourself in that way. And so, you know, YouTube shorts, reels, we just don't have time for that. I don't know how all these influencers have time to make all those things. I know a lot of them have support and assistants that really can do all that for them, but we just don't have it here. It's just us. So in any case, Jerome, thanks for being here. Sede and Phil, you guys are hilarious. Thanks for the super chat as well, Sede. I don't know if you got any movie recommendations. I mean, lay them on me. I mean, I'm assuming, you know, does Star Wars count? Like the originals? Like, is Jabba the Hutt one of like a monster? I don't know if that counts at all. But anyway, guys, you guys are amazing. We'll try to do this actually more often. Give me a thumbs up or tell me yes if you want these weekly to happen. We'll do them if we can make time. I think an hour is definitely long enough for these shows. And you guys are great. Thanks for the comments in the chats. I'll end it here, but thanks again. God bless, and we'll talk soon. You got my email address. You know where to find me. We'll talk next time. Take care.